Hello, boys and girls. Miss Dawson here, and today I will be reading you a story. The title of our story today is Starry Messenger by Peter Sis. Before we start reading the story, I want you to look at the cover of this book and see what you notice on the cover. I see lots of things here in the background. I also see a man standing here and he's looking out of some kind of instrument. I can also see the moon here, and I see a name here that says Galileo. That name sounds familiar. Let's read and find out what happens. Starry Messenger. For hundreds of years, most people thought the earth was the center of the universe. So that means people thought that the earth was in the middle of the universe, and the sun and the moon and all the other planets revolved around it. So they believed that those things went around the earth. They did not doubt or wonder if this was true. They just followed tradition, and a tradition is what's passed down from generation to generation. Then one man looked at the sky and wondered, what if things are not as everybody believes them to be? Maybe the earth and the other planets move around the sun. And you can see his thoughts right here on this observation here. He wrote down his observations, but he did not talk about them, and he did not publish them for a long, long time. He knew he could not prove they were true. It would take someone else to do that. In those days, Italy was a country where many great artists, writers, musicians, and scholars lived. And this illustration shows a map of Italy. In the city of Pisa, a little boy was born with stars in his eyes. His parents named him Galileo. Can you find Galileo in the illustration? Remember, it said it was a little boy was born with stars in his eyes. There he is. I wonder why his blanket is so different from all the others and why he was born with stars in his eyes. Galileo thrived and he grew. In many ways, he was like any other healthy child, but he was more curious than most, and stars were always on his mind. Can you find Galileo in this illustration? If you find the stars, I bet that's him. He studied mathematics and physics and turned out to be a very bright young man who entertained and amused people with his brilliant experiments and observations. Galileo is our star, the people would say. Let's find Galileo on each page. Looks like he may be doing some kind of experiment here where he's dropping things, maybe testing gravity with physics. And right here, he may be giving some kind of speech. Then one day, Galileo heard about a new instrument, which is a special tool for seeing things far, far away. He figured out how it worked and made one for himself. Then he turned it to the sky. I wonder what tool he could have made to be able to see far, far away. Can you guess what tool that would be? I'm thinking a telescope as well. Night after night, he gazed through his telescope and wrote down everything he observed. Then he published his observations in a book, which he called the Starry Messenger. Oh, so now I'm kind of connecting that to the title of the book. The title is The Starry Messenger, and Galileo named the book that he wrote down all of his observations The Starry Messenger. So those things kind of connect. And if we look at the illustrations here on these pages, it shows all of the observations that he had night after night after looking through his telescope and looking at the different things he saw there in the sky. Galileo was amazed by what he could see with his telescope. This illustration shows what he may have seen through his telescope. Do you notice anything there? People read Galileo's book and they became inspired. He made maps of the heavens and dedicated the four newly discovered stars of Jupiter to his patron and ruler, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo II. And there he is doing that. Soon, Galileo was famous. More and more people celebrated the stars, and they celebrated Galileo and his discoveries with statues and parades and spectacular events. So he's becoming famous just from his observations and the things that he shared. His fame grew, and the celebrations became extravaganzas. I mean, they became even bigger. But now the church began to worry. Galileo had become too popular. By upholding the idea that the earth was not the center of the universe, he had gone against the Bible and everything the ancient philosophers had taught. He had gone against the church. Galileo was ordered to stop believing what he could see with his own two eyes. He was summoned, that means he was commanded, he was made to appear before the highest ruler of the land, the Pope. So we see the big extravaganzas going on there for Galileo, and now we see he's being summoned to go to see the Pope. Galileo was afraid. He knew that people had suffered terrible torture and punishment for not following tradition. It could happen to him. So there he is, and he does look very afraid and very sad. He was tried in the Pope's court, and everyone could see that the stars had left his eyes. Now, looking at this photo here, this illustration, why do you think the stars left Galileo's eyes? He had had the stars in his eyes and loved the stars all of his life. Why do you think they left his eyes now? Galileo was condemned to spend the rest of his life locked in the house under guard. So that means he was made to stay in his house for the rest of his life and couldn't leave. But he still had stars on his mind, and no one could keep him from thinking about the wonders of the skies and the mysteries of the universe. And even when he went blind, that means he couldn't see, no one could keep him from passing his ideas along to others until the day he died. But still, the ideas lived on. So even after he died, because he published his observations, they were able to live on and people still were able to read. Finally, more than 300 years later, the leaders of the very church that had punished Galileo pardoned him, and they admitted that he was probably, in fact, surely, and absolutely right. So let's think about that for a moment. Now, he was condemned to stay into his home for the rest of his life because they felt like he was breaking the laws and not going with the church. But now we just read on this page that the very people, the very church that punished him, soon found out that Galileo was surely right. He was right about his observations. The end of Starry Messenger. Now, we've read this whole book, The Starry Messenger. Now, what I want you to do is to turn and talk to your partner and kind of talk about how you feel about what happened with Galileo. Do you believe the what he believed about the earth, and that is it wasn't the center of the universe? And what do you feel about what happened to him and how he was condemned to stay inside of his home? How would you feel if that happened to you? Have a great day.